I can still hear that night in my head, the way the wind screamed through the trees like some furious spirit, the thunder rolling over the mountain like it was splitting the sky in half. I'd lived up there long enough to know when a storm was dangerous, but this one felt different. It wasn't just weather. It was rage. I stood by my little window staring out at sheets of rain when, through the blur, I saw it. A flash of orange down the ridge. At first I thought it was lightning catching a tree, but then I saw smoke, then flames. My stomach dropped. It was coming from the Harlow's place. Mr. and Mrs. Harlow were the only neighbors I had for miles. They were old, 70s at least, but tougher than most people half their age. They'd lived on this mountain long before I was even born, and now their cabin, the one they'd built with their own hands, was on fire. I didn't think twice. I grabbed my flashlight, pulled on my boots, and ran into the storm. The rain slapped my face so hard it stung, and the mud pulled at my feet like it wanted me to turn back, but I couldn't. By the time I reached their clearing, the fire had eaten most of the cabin. The roof was gone, the porch had collapsed, and I could hear them shouting over the roar of the wind.
"Help, please, someone!"
It cut through me. I pushed forward, covering my face from the heat. Mr. Harlow was trying to drag his wife away from the burning doorway, coughing and trembling. I threw my arm around her, pulling her free while he stumbled beside us. The fire hissed as rain hit it, steam rising like ghosts in the dark. We barely made it out before the rest of the house caved in with a crash that echoed across the valley. I got them back to my cabin. It wasn't much, one room, a wood stove, and barely enough space for me, but it was warm and standing, which was more than they had. I wrapped them in blankets, boiled water for tea, and tried to calm them down. Mrs. Harlow kept whispering, "Everything's gone," over and over. Mr. Harlow just sat staring into the fire, his face gray, eyes hollow. I wanted to say something to make it better. But what do you say when someone's entire life just burned to ash? When the storm finally eased, I stepped outside. The mountain looked broken. Trees snapped, mudslides cutting through the trail, fences flattened. We were completely cut off. No phone service, no road down to town, nothing. I knew help wouldn't come for days, maybe longer. We'd have to survive on what we had. For the next week, I shared my supplies. Canned food, firewood, even my last few dry blankets. They'd lost everything: clothes, tools, photographs, their old dog who'd vanished during the storm. Mrs. Harlow cried quietly at night, clutching one of my old flannel shirts because it still smelled like smoke and pine. Like home. And every time I saw her shaking beside the fire, guilt twisted in my chest. They were too old to start over. I was just a 22-year-old kid living alone on a mountain, but I couldn't watch them fade away like that. That's when the idea hit me. My dad was a carpenter before he passed. He taught me how to shape wood, how to measure by feel, how to build something that could stand against time. I hadn't built anything big since he died, but maybe that was exactly what I needed to do now. So I told them. "I'm going to build you a new cabin," I said. "Right here on this mountain. You'll have a home again." Mrs. Harlow smiled weakly. "Oh, sweetheart, that's kind of you, but it's too much. You've done enough." Mr. Harlow didn't say anything for a long time. He just stared into the fire, then finally looked at me and said, "If you mean it, I'll help. My old hands still know a thing or two." That was all I needed. The next morning, we started clearing what was left of their cabin. It was hard seeing the ruins up close: blackened beams, twisted metal, the melted remains of picture frames. Every step felt like walking through someone's memories. We salvaged what little we could: a box of rusted nails, a few tools, a broken chair leg that Mrs. Harlow couldn't bring herself to throw away. The rest was gone. I picked a new spot a little higher on the ridge, where the ground was drier and the trees offered some windbreak. I drew a plan in the dirt, small, simple, but strong. One main room, a stone fireplace, and a porch facing sunrise. It didn't need to be fancy. It just needed to feel like home. Then the real work began. We chopped trees from dawn till dusk. I used my axe so much that blisters turned into calluses. Mr. Harlow insisted on helping even though I begged him to rest. "If I stop working, I'll start thinking," he'd say. Mrs. Harlow cooked what she could: soup from canned beans, cornbread baked on the stove. Every evening we'd sit by the fire, sore and tired but smiling. The skeleton of the cabin began to rise log by log, and with it, hope. I'll never forget the first day the wall stood high enough to block the wind. Mrs. Harlow touched the rough wood and whispered, "It already feels like home." That moment made every ache worth it. But mountain life never lets you have peace for long. One morning, while I was down by the stream cutting more timber, I heard an engine. You don't usually hear cars up here, so I froze. A black SUV crawled up the muddy path, tires spinning. Two men stepped out wearing county jackets and carrying clipboards. One of them called out, "You the one living up here?" "Yeah," I said carefully. "We've had reports of unregistered construction on this land," the taller one said, flipping through papers. "You aware you're not permitted to build new dwellings in this zone?" My stomach dropped. "It's not commercial," I said quickly. "It's for my neighbors. Their house burned down in the storm. I'm just helping them rebuild." The man sighed like he'd heard every excuse before. "Doesn't matter. You can't build without a permit. If you continue, you'll face fines and possible demolition." He handed me a notice, then climbed back into the SUV and drove off, leaving mud splattered across my boots and my heart pounding with anger. I stared at that paper like it was a threat from the universe itself. These people, Mr. and Mrs. Harlow, had lost everything, and now the county wanted to stop me from giving them something as simple as a roof? When I got back to the cabin, I told them. Mrs. Harlow covered her mouth and cried. Mr. Harlow's face hardened. "We'll finish it anyway," he said quietly. "Let them come." And that's when I realized I couldn't stop. I wouldn't. Maybe it was reckless, maybe stupid, but it was right. We worked in secret after that, starting before dawn and finishing after dark, so the smoke from the fire couldn't be seen from the road. Every hammer swing echoed like defiance. The walls went up, the roof beams followed, and slowly, the new cabin took shape despite everything against us. Sometimes I'd lie awake at night wondering if I was crazy. I had no guarantee the county wouldn't tear it down. But then I'd hear Mrs. Harlow humming softly in her sleep, or Mr. Harlow murmuring about how he used to build fences for his father, and I'd remember why I started. It wasn't about breaking rules. It was about giving them a home before winter took them too. We kept going. Some days the snow came early, dusting the ground while we worked. My hands were cracked, bleeding, but I didn't care. Each plank, each nail, felt like defiance against everything cruel that had happened. By the third week, the cabin finally looked real. Sturdy walls, a roof covered in metal sheets, a small stone chimney that I built from rocks by the creek. When I lit the first fire inside, the glow filled the whole room. The warmth wasn't just from the flames, it was from the feeling that we'd done something impossible. But before we could celebrate, the sound of tires crunching on frozen dirt echoed again. The SUV, the same officers. They got out, looked at the nearly finished cabin, and one of them said, "Didn't we tell you to stop?" I stood there covered in sawdust, hands shaking, not from fear, but from fury. "They've got nowhere else," I said. "You can find me, arrest me, whatever you want. But this cabin stays." The man looked at me for a long moment. Then surprisingly, he sighed. "Look, kid, I get it. But rules are rules. I'll file my report. Maybe the higher-ups will show mercy." He drove off again, leaving uncertainty behind. That night, none of us slept. The Harlows tried to hide their worry, but I could feel it. Winter was closing in fast, and if they were forced to leave, they wouldn't survive down in town without money or family. So that was the situation I was in. A young guy alone on a mountain, a nearly finished cabin, 2 people depending on me, and the law breathing down my neck. I had to make a choice. Before I tell you what happened next, what I did and how everything changed, I want you to think about it. If you were in my shoes, would you have stopped building and obeyed the law, leaving that elderly couple with nowhere to go? Or would you have risked everything to finish what you started? That night after the officers left, I sat awake by the fire, staring at the unfinished cabin through the frosted window. The snow had started falling heavier, covering everything in a white silence that almost felt cruel. Every gust of wind made the roof creak, reminding me that we were running out of time. The Harlows were asleep in the corner of my cabin, huddled together under every blanket I owned. Mrs. Harlow's breathing was shallow. She'd been coughing for days. Mr. Harlow tried to hide his worry, but I could see it in the way his hands trembled when he poured water into her cup. I knew what that meant. If I didn't finish the new cabin soon, she wasn't going to make it through winter. The next morning, I didn't even think about the county's warning. I just started working. The wind bit through my jacket, My fingers numb from the cold, but I kept hammering, sawing, hauling logs, anything to get it done. Mr. Harlow tried to help, but I told him to stay with her. He was too weak now, his cough almost as bad as hers. He didn't argue, and that scared me more than anything. He'd always been stubborn. When he stopped arguing, I knew he was running out of fight. I worked from dawn till night, stopping only to eat and warm my hands by the fire. Every sound on the wind made me paranoid. A car engine, a voice, anything that might mean the county had come back to shut us down for good. But the snow kept falling, covering the tracks, and for a while, it felt like the mountain itself was protecting us. A few days later, when the walls were sealed and the chimney was ready, I finally moved them in. I'll never forget that moment. I carried Mrs. Harlow in my arms across the threshold like some kind of ritual, and when she saw the fire crackling in the hearth, she started to cry. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's home." Mr. Harlow stood there quietly, one hand on my shoulder, and said, "You did it, son." That word, son, hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't heard anyone call me that in years, not since my dad passed. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a family again. Over the next few weeks, we settled into a new rhythm. I hunted for food, fixed the roof, and built shelves and a table out of leftover wood. Mrs. Harlow started smiling again, humming while she stirred soup over the fire. Mr. Harlow told me old stories about the mountain, how he and his wife built their first home here when they were young, how their son used to climb the same trails I now walked. The place started to feel alive again. It wasn't just a cabin. It was a miracle we'd built out of loss and stubborn hope. But peace never lasts long up here. One morning in late December, I heard engines again. I looked out the window and saw 2 trucks making their way up the trail, one with county officials and the other loaded with tools and a demolition crew. My stomach sank. I ran outside before they could even park. "You can't do this," I shouted, my voice echoing in the cold air. The man from before stepped out, his breath forming clouds in the freezing wind. "I'm sorry, kid," he said, not looking sorry at all. "Orders came from higher up. The structure wasn't permitted. We have to remove it before it's permanently occupied." Behind me, I heard the cabin door open. Mr. Harlow stepped out, leaning on his cane, his face pale, but his eyes sharp. "This is our home," he said firmly. "You'll have to go through me." Mrs. Harlow stood in the doorway behind him, wrapped in a shawl, trembling but defiant. The workers hesitated. None of them wanted to drag an old couple out of their home in the snow. I turned to the official. "Look at them," I said. "They lost everything. You think paperwork matters more than keeping them alive?" He sighed. "It's not my call." Something in me snapped. "Then make it your call," I said. "You see this?" I pointed to the cabin. I built it with my own hands. I didn't do it for money or credit. I did it because no one else cared enough to help them. So if you want to tear it down, you'll have to go through me, too. For a long, heavy moment, no one spoke. The wind whistled through the trees and snowflakes fell between us like tiny pieces of glass. Then, to my surprise, one of the crewmen spoke up quietly. "Man, it's freezing. Let's just go back down, yeah?" The official looked at him, then at the Harlows, then at me. Finally, he rubbed his forehead and said, "I'll file a delay. Maybe we can review it again in spring." Then he turned, got in his truck, and left. Just like that, they were gone. I dropped to my knees in the snow, shaking with relief. Mr. Harlow put his hand on my shoulder again. "You stood up for us," he said. "You're a good man." Mrs. Harlow was crying quietly behind him, her hands pressed to her mouth. I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt tired. But when I looked up at the cabin, glowing with firelight against the snow, I knew I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. For the next few months, life on the mountain found a strange peace. Winter was brutal, but the new cabin held strong. I made sure the chimney stayed clear, the woodpile stayed full, and that they never went hungry. Some nights we'd sit together, the 3 of us, and talk about everything from fishing to music to life in the city. They'd tell me about the early years of their marriage, how they moved here with nothing but a tent and a dream, how they built their first cabin log by log. Mrs. Harlow laughed when she said, "I thought he was crazy for bringing me up here." Mr. Harlow smiled and said, "Still worth it." It was those little moments that made it all worth it. I didn't have much in life, but I had that. The warmth of belonging, the simple joy of knowing I'd made a difference. But deep down I knew time wasn't on our side. Mrs. Harlow's health was getting worse. Her cough turned into long fits that left her gasping, and no amount of herbs or soup could fix it. She refused to go down to the hospital. "I want to stay here," she told me one night, her voice faint. "This is home. You gave us that gift. I want to stay in it." I sat with her until she fell asleep that night, the firelight flickering across her face. Mr. Harlow stayed by her side, holding her hand. And in that silence, I realized something. The cabin wasn't just for them. It was for me, too. It reminded me what humanity still looked like when everything else in the world felt cold and indifferent. A few weeks later, I woke up before dawn to a stillness that didn't feel right. No wind, no creak of wood, just silence. I went to check on them. The fire had burned low and Mr. Harlow was sitting beside the bed holding her hand. When he looked up at me, I didn't have to ask. She was gone. Peaceful, quiet, like the mountain had finally let her rest. We buried her under the oak tree near the ridge, where the morning sun hit first. I carved a small wooden marker with her name and a line she used to say often. "Home is not a place. It's the people you build it with." Mr. Harlow didn't speak much for days after that. He just sat by the window staring at the mountains she loved so much. I tried to keep busy, cutting wood, checking traps, fixing the roof, anything to fill the silence. But nothing filled it. One evening he called me over. His voice was weaker than I'd ever heard it. "You know," he said, "I always thought I'd die up here alone. But you came along. You gave us hope when there shouldn't have been any. Promise me something, boy. Promise me you'll stay up here, keep this place alive." "I promise," I said quietly. He smiled, closed his eyes, and said, "Good. She'd like that." He passed a week later, sitting in that same chair, watching the sunset. I buried him beside her under the same oak, carved another marker, and sat there until the stars came out. I'd lost the only people who ever felt like family, but somehow it didn't feel like an ending. The cabin stood strong behind me, the fire inside still burning. It felt like they were still there, in the walls, the air, the mountain itself. Spring came eventually. The snow melted and wildflowers bloomed around their graves. I fixed up the cabin even more, adding small touches they would have loved. A new porch swing, shelves for books, a wind chime made from old spoons she once used. Sometimes hikers passed through and asked who built the place. I'd just smile and say, it was a gift. One afternoon, months later, a county truck came up the trail again. The same official stepped out holding a clipboard. I braced myself for bad news, but instead he smiled. "Heard the story," he said quietly. "The folks down at the office decided to let it stand. They said anyone who'd go that far to help deserves to keep it. Nice work, son." He drove away without another word, and for the first time in a long while I laughed. The mountain was quiet again, but not empty. The cabin wasn't just wood and nails anymore. It was a legacy, and of love, loss, and kindness in a world that too often forgets those things. Sometimes, on calm nights, I sit on the porch and swear I can still hear Mrs. Harlow humming, or Mr. Harlow chopping wood out back. Maybe it's just the wind, or maybe it's something more. Either way, I keep the fire burning. I keep the promise, because they taught me something I'll never forget. That even when storms take everything, what matters most can still be rebuilt if your heart's strong enough to try. Tell me, if you were in my place, would you have done the same? Would you have risked everything to build that cabin, knowing it could all be taken away? If you think I was right to do what I did, hit that like button. And if you believe kindness still matters in this world, share this story. Subscribe for more stories like this one and tell me in the comments what you would have done on that mountain. I'll see you all in the next story.